Hello, I'm getting this video out quickly before Christmas. I just want to catch up with you all because there's been a longer gap than usual. So in this video, I'm going to talk about codependency. In Wikipedia, it says, codependency is a behavioural condition in a relationship where one person enables another person's addiction, poor mental health, immaturity, irresponsibility, or underachievement. So that's quite interesting, but I also feel that it can be taken to be quite narrow unless we look at addiction as being a wider concept than we usually think of with addiction. So rather than just being addicted to a substance, it can be being addicted to validation or being addicted to getting a reaction from the other person. So for example, a narcissist is addicted to getting validation, but so is someone who's codependent. So another thing about codependent people is that they need validation constantly in order to have a sense of who they are. They rely on getting that validation from the other person because they don't have enough of it inside themselves. So for somebody who is a victim of narcissistic abuse, for example, you rely on being told that you're okay and being thought of in a positive light. So the reason that somebody will take abuse from someone else is because they put the other person's view of them before their own. In fact, they form their own opinion of themselves based on what that other person thinks of them. So as a result, they give the other person so much power. But a narcissist is also a codependent person because they also rely on getting validation all the time. So whether it's slightly different because they don't always need to know that that they're thought of well. They need to know that they're thought of as important. So they either need to be admired or adored or hated. That works for them as well. They just need someone to have a strong reaction to them. That's the validation that helps them to feel that they know who they are. And of course they don't. That's just who they want to be. They're getting their mask reinforced whenever they seek this validation. We're all codependent to some degree. Just being human means that you need other people, and other people's opinions of you are going to matter. That's the way that we're made, So for example, if a group pushes you out, if you're an outsider of a group, that's a horrible feeling because in evolutionary terms, we couldn't be outside of a group. It was really dangerous. We might get killed by a predator. We wouldn't get a share of the hunt, the food. So it was important what the group thought of us. So, our identity is to a degree formed by what other people think of us, and we are dependent on each other. But when somebody is codependent, that need to be seen in a positive light by somebody else is excessive, and it comes before our own view of ourselves. We can't see ourselves separately from how somebody else sees us. So in this video, I'm going to go beyond the traditional view of what a codependent person is, and I'm not just going to talk about people who hang out with abusers or irresponsible, addicted partners, because there's more to it than that. And those people are themselves codependent on the person who enables their behaviour. You don't have a relationship where one person is codependent and the other one isn't. There's always two of you, and it's always a sort of dance that fits really well, of course in a really unhealthy way. And at the same time, both people are getting their needs met in different ways, that and those different ways cause the damage in that relationship. So the second sign of being a codependent person is that you have issues with boundaries, either your own boundaries or somebody else's boundaries. You don't respect them. Do you tend to be drawn to people who you can rescue, who need something from you? Do you find yourself trying to find someone's vulnerable side, trying to get them to open up to you quite early on, because you're used to being the caretaker and you don't feel comfortable until you can take that role? You feel a bit powerless and it's a bit threatening if they don't need something from you. Those are signs that you will both be prepared to ignore your boundaries and take care of someone else a bit too much, but also a sign that you're prepared to ignore their boundaries and try to push them to open up to you and push them into a vulnerable position. Or they might be sexual boundaries, where one person pushes the other person to have sex again early on in the relationship. But both people are responsible for ignoring one person's boundaries. Boundaries get pushed in conversations. One person might talk all the time about their problems to another when that's not their job. So say between friends, one person might always take over the conversation, or one person might always be late and not respect the time of the other person. Or they might not respect money boundaries. They might push for someone else to spend more money. Self-sacrifice is sort of traditionally one of the hallmarks of a codependent person, but really I think that self-sacrifice is a reason for there being an issue with boundaries for one party. So they will ignore their own boundaries because they believe that they have to put the other person's needs before their own. The reason for putting someone else's needs before your own, although you'll be probably unaware of it and unconscious of it, the original reason deep down is a belief that that you have to help somebody else in order for them to care about you. It usually starts with a parent. People who end up ignoring their own boundaries usually did so in childhood and had to do so. They had to support a parent who didn't have enough to give them. So in a way, they behaved like the parent. So if you feel that somebody else's needs matter more, it's usually because that's what you were taught, and your way of surviving is to support the other person in the hope that they will then support you. The other codependent person is the more parasitic one. So they need to sort of suck the energy from the first codependent person in order to feel like they have enough support. So it's narcissistic. It doesn't mean that they're a narcissist, but because you get all sorts of different situations where that's happening. Somebody could just be depressed and they're still going to be unknowingly sucking something out of somebody else. They might always talk about their problems when the two of you are together, or a health condition or whatever it is, but they need the other person in order to feel like they can cope. That's what they think. And it's always an illusion, apart from obviously physically, if somebody's ill and needs physical assistance, it's always an illusion for both codependent people that they need the other person in order to cope. So one way to know if you have difficulty with your own boundaries is to ask yourself if you have a problem saying no to people. Does it make you feel guilty and like you've done something wrong? Another sign you have difficulty with boundaries is how much do you put yourself out for other people? Do you have to spend a certain amount of money on their present, for example, at Christmas? Or do you spend more time than you want to talking to them or helping them? Do you put up with an imbalance in your relationship? And that could be personally or it could be professionally, that you're maybe you're working overtime. I remember there was a time when I worked in an office and I used to work insane hours, but that was what was expected where I was, so I just put up with it. And I never really saw the reward for it, but I just accepted it. So you know, do you find yourself doing that? Giving too much and never really getting what you should be getting for what you're giving? If you're with someone abusive, do you find yourself making excuses for them? That's really common. So many people are embarrassed if their partner has been abusive and they don't want their friends or family to think badly of them, so they make excuses for that behaviour. All of these are signs that you have trouble setting your own boundaries. And equally, the other person in the relationship will have trouble respecting your boundaries. And that's again because they are reliant on going over your boundaries and ignoring them in order to feel like they matter. If they don't do that, then they don't feel like they matter enough. So for example, one person in a relationship might be a jealous kind of person and they might restrict what their partner does. You know, they might say, oh, don't go to this party without me. Don't spend time with people of the opposite sex. You know, or they might be more subtle than that. They might just make them feel guilty about doing that. But that's a sign that, you know, they find it really hard to manage their own emotions and to cope with the idea that other people might be interested in you. So they ignore your boundaries, the boundaries that everyone should have, really, to spend their time as they want to, as long as they're trustworthy. They ignore that in order to meet their own needs, and then the other person in return ignores their own boundaries. So you can see how the two work together, you know, that one person needs to ignore the other person's boundaries and the other person needs to ignore their own boundaries and put the person they're with first in order to feel like they matter, you know, and in order to feel like they're going to be liked enough. So both people are in this addictive relationship that's really unhealthy. Both people are under the illusion that they only matter enough if they can get something from the other person. And so as a result, both people really limit their own power and their own potential because they ignore what they're capable of inside and look to someone else all the time for it. What's ironic is it's that very belief that somebody else has the answers for you that's actually limiting you. Another sign of being a codependent person is that you worry a lot about the other person. So you might worry because you don't trust them and you don't know what they're up to, or you might worry about whether they're safe, but excessively, you know, sort of worry, are they okay, in a way that gets in your way, you know, because you're spending energy on it. Maybe it's keeping you up at night. And that's because that person is coming before yourself. The reason that you worry about them is because they're not responsible, either because they're not honest with you or because they're not responsible for themselves or for their own health. So you're left feeling like you're the one who's responsible for them. And that's the same really if you don't trust them, because if you feel like you're responsible for what they end up doing to betray you, then that's a sign that your boundaries are being crossed. Because really, if you have good reason not to trust the person, then your role is to just get yourself out of that relationship. If you're still there, but you're feeling all of this worry, then that's a sign that you're ignoring your own boundaries again. And it's also a sign that you're with somebody who doesn't take responsibility for themselves. You might have had an argument with your sister and she might have said some really hurtful things to you and then ignored you ever since. And you might go over and over what happened and just not be able to make sense of it, just get really confused because it doesn't make sense that she would have misunderstood you so badly. And meanwhile, she might just be getting on with her life and not worrying at all about you. So the other side of the same coin for a different kind of codependent person is that they don't consider the other person's feelings. They will lack empathy for them because their own needs are so, they come first to the point where they just can't think about anybody else's needs. So that would be, for example, a narcissist who might be going out cheating on their partner because they need to feel like they're needed by other people, and that comes before their own integrity and before their partner's feelings. The person who is putting up with abuse, for example, or putting up with having to always take care of the other person emotionally, that person is really only doing it for themselves. And they might not be aware of it. Usually they wouldn't be, but they're really only doing it because they feel like they need to be good enough in order to be loved. And the other person is also doing it for themselves in a more obvious way. It's clearer if they don't have empathy that they're only thinking of themselves. But that's more obvious. If you're somebody who's codependent and always putting everybody first, what are your reasons for it? You may be somebody who has a lot of empathy, who really does care about other people, but if you're putting them first consistently, then there's still an underlying reason for that that's about you. It's always about you trying to get your needs met, even if it seems like it's a really indirect way to do it. You're trying to be worthy of somebody's love, and that's why you put them first. So really you're doing it because you want something back from them. And the other person is not caring about you, is not really taking any responsibility for themselves. The person who's more obviously out for themselves, the reason for that is because they don't have anything to give the other person or themselves in any genuine way, and because they don't trust people, so they can't actually have a real relationship with someone because they don't trust that anyone will love them. So in a way, really both sides of this coin of codependency are looking for the same thing, feeling like they matter. And that's because neither of them think they do, and they go about it in opposite ways. When you're codependent and you feel that you need something from the other person, you're naturally going to be unreasonable. You're going to expect more from them than is reasonable, and you're not really going to consider their feelings. So you might be more bossy or pushy or needy, and then there's going to be emotion behind that when you don't get those needs met, because they're needs that you've had from very early on in your life, you know. So it does feel like a kind of addiction. For codependent people, the way they feel in control of their own lives is through another person. So because we can't control other people, that makes life quite difficult for a codependent person, because they have a need to control somebody else. And that works as best it can in a codependent relationship, because the needs are sort of opposite. And so, when it comes to something like boundaries, as I've said, as long as one person is willing to ignore their own boundaries, that works in a sort of dysfunctional way. But, in day-to-day life, we can't control somebody else. So for a narcissist, they might want to control somebody's emotional reactions. And so they have to find the right target, somebody who doubts themselves and puts them first, and then that might work for them. For someone who is a codependent who's more empathic, they might need to control the other person's addictions. They might try to stop them drinking as much, or try to make them go to the doctor if they don't care about their health, or the dentist, or they might try to give them a curfew because they don't trust them when they go out late at night. So that's another sign of codependency, is trying to control the other person's behaviour. Another way of telling if you're codependent is to look at the way you communicate. Do you feel that you can be clear about what you think and what you feel, or do you tend to be passive aggressive and not direct with people? Do you give people the silent treatment, or try to make them feel guilty, or try to make them miss you? So that, if you're not codependent and you don't need something from the other person, then you're free to just say what you think, and you're also probably in some ways more able to empathize with them and care about how they feel when you say something, because you don't have any ulterior motive or need from them. The best way to stop being codependent is to realise that you are. Because once you start to see that you're doing it, and to become aware of it, and to question what's behind it, what's your real motive, that's when you empower yourself to do things differently. If you need to ignore your boundaries for someone, it's a sign that that they don't take enough responsibility for themselves. And it's also a sign that you think that your needs come second. If you notice yourself doing any of the things I've mentioned in the video, then it's a good excuse to start to look inside yourself for what you need. When you start doing that, you'll realise that it's actually really liberating and empowering, and it makes you feel much stronger. And that's for both sides of that coin. That's if you ignore your own boundaries, or if you ignore somebody else's boundaries, for example. In both cases, you're ignoring that you have what you need inside yourself. And as soon as you start to recognise that and find it inside yourself, you'll realise that you actually need a lot less than you thought you did from other people. And, and because of that, you'll start to be attracted to different kinds of people. You won't be attracted to people who are codependent. That will feel quite draining. You'll start to be drawn towards people who who might not appear at first to have as much to give to you, because you won't need it. That will seem quite smothering and, you know, just sort of overdone. So you'll start to look for other people who are more independent, and you'll feel freer and more energized, less anxious, less stressed, because you won't always be trying to control what you can't control, which is other people. Codependency is on a spectrum, and we're all there somewhere. So there's always going to be something that you do to some degree that's a bit unhealthy. It might be that you stay longer at work. It might be that you don't want to deal with it when someone's in a bad mood and you want them to be in a different mood, you know, but in some respect we usually look outside of ourselves for something that really we can find inside. So I'm going to leave it here. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. For all of you who celebrate Christmas, I wish you a very Merry Christmas. And for those of you who don't, have a lovely, relaxing, peaceful holiday, and a Happy New Year to everyone. And I'll see you in the next video.